You're listening to Soap Dirt, the latest in television entertainment news.
Hey there, Y&R fans. It's Belinda from Soap Dirt. And given the recent hiccups in Victor and Nikki's marriage, we decided to take a look back today at all of Victor's many, many spouses and many, many, many weddings. Do you remember all 9 of his brides that span across 15 weddings? And do you remember which 3 of the 9 brides that he married more than once? Hey, let's take a walk back through Victor's personal life. But first, please click subscribe if you haven't already. We really appreciate you following because it really helps the channel. Now, let's dig in. So the first wife was Genoa Newman. When Victor Newman first showed up on Y&R back in 1980, it was as a married man. He came to Genoa City with Julia on his arm, but was overprotective and basically kind of kept her in storage at the ranch while he worked very long hours. Neglected Julia, began falling for another man, although she hadn't slept with anyone else. But Victor went ahead and cheated with his secretary, Eve Howard. You know that name? Eve, sister of crazy Jordan Howard that just terrorized Nikki using Claire as her weapon. So Julia and Victor tried to work things out, but then he decided to have a vasectomy because she wanted to have kids. It turns out it didn't take. He got her pregnant, but then they argued and she accidentally fell down the stairs. She miscarried, so she left Victor and Genoa City behind. She came back a few times over the years for various plots, but they never, ever remarried. All right. This is his most frequent flyer wife, and that is Nikki Reed. They married the first time in 1984 and divorced in 88. So after losing Julia, Victor was very depressed. He headed out for a night of distraction, could not believe his eyes when he saw a beautiful blonde stripper named Nikki. He fell for her, took her under his wing, kind of did this My Fair Lady thing, took her from a low-rent burlesque dancer, more than burlesque, out and out naked dancer, into a high society woman. But then he pushed her away to another man and told her to marry this other guy because he thought he was too old for her. She married that guy. But by that point, she was pregnant by Victor. And so her first marriage ended. And after some more drama, Victor married her and they embarked on what they hoped was happily ever after, but which definitely was not, because this first marriage of theirs only lasted 4 years. His next marriage is kind of a crazy one. Liana Love. They married in 1988, but it wasn't legally binding. So remember, she's the gossip columnist, and she wrote a nasty, nasty expose on Victor, and he thought Nikki had leaked the info to her, and that pushed him to go ahead and divorce Nikki, and then he ran off with Looney Liana to Vegas and had a quickie wedding, but it turns out his divorce to Nikki wasn't final, so that meant his ill-decided marriage to Liana was also not valid. All right, his fourth wife, Ashley Abbott. Their first marriage lasted 2 years. Victor met fourth wife Ashley when she was suffering amnesia after a trauma. They began an affair while he was still married to Nikki after the whole Liana Love fiasco. After some soapy drama, Victor decided that he was going to choose Ashley over Nikki and left Nikki. And then he went back to Nikki when she was having a medical crisis. And when he did that, then Ashley aborted their baby she was carrying. And then a while later, Ashley and Victor got back together and married, but they were plagued with issues related to Nikki. And Victoria was also constantly scheming to reunite her parents. But that wasn't the first time at the altar for Ashley and Victor. More on their subsequent ceremonies later, as we are doing these in chronological order. Next was Hope Adams, who, of course, is Adam's mom. And he met her when he was out of Genoa City. Victor had basically decided he had enough of life in Genoa City and walked away, and he was presumed dead, but he was actually in Kansas on one of his many walkabouts he had during his long life, and he found this blind woman who was about to be raped by this horrible guy. He saved her, and then he spent time on the farm, and they bonded, and then he was going to go back, but then he heard that everybody thought he was dead anyway, so he thought, oh, I'm going to stay. Unlike most of the other women that Victor has been with, Hope was actually a virgin, and he made love to her. He was the very first man she ever had. Then he proposed to her, and then they got married in 1994. He talked her to coming back into Genoa City to get married. Nikki showed up and crashed the wedding, made a big whole scene, but they still got married, found out she was pregnant, and things got really bad because they found out that the baby might inherit her blindness. So Victor wanted her to have an abortion. She did not like that at all. So she left him and went back to Kansas, where she took up with her whole old boyfriend. Then she told him, look, I'm just going to raise my baby here. I don't want you around. So he was upset and divorced her in 1995. And now she has been dead for quite a while. All right. His next wife, believe it or not, was Diane Jenkins, who is not dead anymore. They got married back in 1997. So initially, Diane got on Victor's radar because he wanted to punish Jack Abbott, as he liked to do. So he decided to steal Diane as revenge, but then he fell for her. They got married, but things got rough with them because she wanted a child. And by this point, he had had another vasectomy. I don't know how many vasectomies it takes for a vasectomy to actually take, but maybe Victor just has that super mustache sperm. I don't even know. He had had another vasectomy at that point, and it didn't work out because Nikki was shot. So Victor temporarily, it was planned to be temporary. He divorced Diane so he could grant Nikki's deathbed wedding wish, and that happened in 1998. Of course, Nikki survived, and then she and Victor decided to be together again. Diane was furious and wanted revenge, so she stole some of Victor's frozen sperm, but then, of course, there were soap shenanigans, and Nikki was trying to keep her from having that sperm and had it swapped, and it turns out she wound up with Jack's sperm instead. That's how she got Kyle Abbott, by the way. Despite all of this, Victor wasn't quite done with Diane. They divorced in 1999, but he married her a few years later. But before then, he married Nikki again, this time in 2002. This was the wedding that they had decided to carry out when it turned out their deathbed wedding was less than legal because, once again, he didn't cross the T's and dot the I's, and his divorce from Diane wasn't quite legal. Unfortunately, it took a little while to sort out those issues with Diane and all her sperm stealing, but then they finally got married, but they were both behaving badly off and on, so they wound up divorcing again after 6 years of marriage this time. This would still, though, not be their last marriage, just their second of many more. Next of his brides is Sabrina Castellana. They married in June of 2008, about 5 months after he divorced Nikki. This is his second wife that's passed away, by the way. Victor's next wife was actually a college friend of Victoria Newman's, a much, much younger woman. She came to see Victoria in Genoa City and started spending time with Victor, who had split from Nikki. Victoria wanted her parents back together, but he fell for her friend, and they kept it secret from Victoria. And of course, she was furious and ended her friendship with Sabrina when it all came out. But that did not stop her dad from putting a ring on Sabrina's finger. And despite his repeat vasectomies, she turned up pregnant because, super sperm. And that was just before they married, and not long after they married. In fact, like a month and 6 weeks later, roughly, Sabrina died as a result of injuries sustained in a car crash while Victor was not in the vehicle with her. She appeared a couple of times to him after her death in like a ghostly dream state sort of thing over the years. All right. Wife number 10 was a repeat offender, Ashley Abbott. They got married in July of 2009, about a year after he was widowed by the death of Julia. So this was almost a decade after the first time he married Ashley. They got hitched again. She had found Victor when he'd gone missing, and they reunited. And then Ashley was very happy to get pregnant by him not long after. But then, of course, because the vasectomy didn't stick, but then Adam was gaslighting her. She fell and lost the baby. That was when she had a complete and total mental breakdown, wound up in a psych hospital, and their marriage fizzled. That time, they were married less than a year, just from July to November of 2009. His next wife was Maggie McLean. So Victor's next marriage was also ultimately found invalid, but at least it wasn't a repeat of past matrimonial disasters of his. In fact, this was a much bigger disaster that almost got him killed. So Maggie was this nutcase schemer who was working with Deacon Sharp to push Nikki off the wagon so she could have Victor and he could have Nikki. And part of Maggie's plan was marrying Victor in Vegas, then killing him so she would be a very wealthy widow. But Victor found out her plan and kind of set her up so he could turn the tables on her, and she was arrested. But boy, that was a soapy, fun mess. All right, wedding number 12, repeat offender, Diane Jenkins. They married in March of 2011, which was like 5 months after his other weird wedding to this other woman. He just likes to be married, no matter to who, I think. Victor's second wedding to Diane Jenkins was when Mara West was in the role, not Susan Walters. And Diane at that point had been with Nick for a while, but Victor was insanely jealous. Diane was working on the ranch at the time, hanging around a lot back in the days. They eloped, but then they got annulled not long after because, of course, he couldn't stop thinking about Nikki. All right, so 13 and 14. Despite Nikki being the reason he split with Diane, she was not his next marriage. Again, instead, Victor pursued a woman way too young for him, a woman who had prior married two of his sons, Nick and Adam. So by now, I mean Sharon Collins Newman. Victor and Sharon got engaged while he was in prison. It was during a very dark time for her and for Adam. Then they got married on January 13th, 2012, and they annulled a few days later after she bedded Adam and he cheated with Nikki. But they weren't done. They got married again, like 6.5, 7 months later in August of 2012. That was after she had left Adam, reconciled with Nick, but then they were having problems and she and Nikki had a huge cat fight and Victor threw her out and chose Sharon. And so Victor and Sharon married on his jet on the way to Vegas, but then he wandered out of town on their wedding night, told her it was over via text, but it turned out he had fallen from his horse during a ride and he had amnesia. He later got an annulment. Really weird. All right, number 15, the last and final wedding. So not long after things fell apart with Sharon, Nikki and Victor got engaged again, but then the wedding was delayed and it didn't take place until the 40th anniversary of Young and the Restless on March 20th, 2013. And despite all the hardships, it has lasted. That is 15 weddings for Victor with, is that 9 different women? Yep, just had to check my math. 9 women, 15 weddings. I didn't want to lie to y'all. As for which of his wives was the best for him, I'd say that he saved the best for last and is sticking with the love of his life, Nikki Newman, after decades of very soapy drama that ripped them apart, but they always found their way back together. Hey, I hope you enjoyed this look back at Victor's marital history. Please click subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss any of our updates, spoilers, and news. And come back soon because I'm here talking Y&R 7 days a week. And as always, this is Belinda from Soap Dirt.
Thank you for being a loyal listener. Follow us wherever you get your podcast because you don't want to miss the next episode. Soap Dirt is on all the major podcast platforms, including Apple Podcast, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and more.